Today I'm making some scatter terrain to add a little bit of beauty into the gardens and town encounters on your D&D table, using some of the cheapest materials I can find. This overgrown archway and garden bed combination can go down on just about any table and add a little bit of something extra, whether you're just sitting in a town, a farm, a garden, or maybe a Feywild encounter. But it was specifically designed to fit into the modular maze system that I built a few weeks ago. The idea for this build actually came from my comments. Do lattice archways. And you know what, P Black Crow? I actually have a really good idea of how to approach that. So I grabbed out some granny grating. The crossover pattern in this is really handy. I've used it for cages in the past and for some fantasy style windows, but today it's gonna be our wooden lattice as our base piece for our archway. In addition to the granny grating, we're gonna be using a heap of coffee stir sticks, as well as some of these match sticks that I just got from a cheap shop, combining them all to make our base pattern. Then covering it up with some grass tufts and some flocking to bring it into the garden environment that we want for the final aesthetic of this build. So let's jump into the build and start sticking some of this stuff together. So first things first, I'm gonna be cutting up the granny grating. I'm trying to size this up appropriately so that a decent sized miniature could still fit within the opening itself. I'm then going to start cutting up our stir sticks to match the height that I cut out for the granny grating. Once these are all cut to size, I start gluing them in place, just using a super glue and then a spray accelerant to speed up the process a little bit rather than having to hold everything and wait. Then repeating this over all of the edges of both pieces. Once I have a decent style put together, I'm going to use a couple more pieces and glue these together. This width being the same matching 2-inch size that I use for all of my openings in my maze. This super glue accelerant is a game changer for this hobby as it saves you so much time. I had to fill in a couple more gaps of areas that I had missed and then moved on to some matchsticks. These look ridiculous in these bright colors, but I really like the texture on these cheap shop matchsticks. So I glued a few down on the top to fill in our centerpiece and then decided the whole thing needed a bit more detail. So I started with some bamboo skewers, adding in some edging around the sides, and then decided to add a couple more of those matches on top, some internal stabilizing pieces, and really just more and more details so that this has a bit more of an interesting shape. Once I was happy with that shape, I took it outside and gave the whole thing a prime in a cheap grey primer, then came in and hit it with a NATO brown base coat from Tamiya Colors, and once that was fully coated and dry, I gave it a light coat with a wooden deck tan. This is a very bright wooden colour, and I wanted to dirty it up again to match the garden environment. So the entire thing got a fairly heavy coat in an Agrax Earthshade from Citadel. This sort of started to fill in the gaps in my granny grating, but that was nothing a quick blow of air couldn't fix. And with that staining, we're left with a pretty decent piece of scatter terrain that you could use for any garden area on a D&D board. But in my particular case, this size works out perfectly to fit into the openings of my modular maze system that I made a few weeks ago. So if you want to make a pile of these and use them to help connect up all of your different sections of maze, it really could help bring a little bit of an extra pop to that entire system. But I also want to be able to use this as its own piece of garden scatter without needing the full mazes. For that, I want to have a couple of little garden beds on the side. So to keep that in line with the same aesthetic, I'm going to be using the same coffee stir sticks and toothpicks to make up some raised garden beds. I'm going to start this off with some foam board, so we'll peel off the paper layers and just start cutting it to shape. This is 5mm foam board that I get from my local craft shop. I want these to match the width of my archways so it'll sit nicely on the sides. These are going to be the base for our garden beds and we're going to be building around them. So I decided to go about 3 layers deep for my height, then hot gluing these together. There was no rhyme or reason to the specific measurements and heights that I chose for this. I just decided what I thought looked good on the table and repeated this over my second batch before busting out those matchsticks from earlier. I cut a heap of these down to size, as my original plan was to try and fully surround the edges of my garden bed with a whole heap of these matchsticks. But as I started to stick them in place, I realized that it didn't really have the look that I wanted, and it was a bit too time consuming. So I scrapped that idea and cut down some of those coffee stir sticks. These are just a little bit wider than our foam board, so once I layered these up 3 high, they stuck out just that little bit higher and gave us a really nice edge. I glued these down around the rest of it and then brought a few of those matchsticks back to give us some corner pieces. They needed to be chopped down to size, but it worked out really nice. I was happy with this process, so I repeated it on our second garden bed and then got to giving them their first paint coat. They got a fairly thick coat over the foam areas and then a thin coat over all the wooden areas with a Mod Podge and black paint mix. This helps to seal up all of that foam so that when I give them their spray paint, it doesn't melt away. These pieces got the same painting technique as our archway, with the NATO brown and then wooden deck tan, then a heavy staining in an Agrax earthshade. Now that they're matching our other piece, it's time to add in our soil effects. I love this Tamiya soil effects. I like to add a chunk down and then mix a tiny bit of water in there, really getting it to spread out to the edges. It looks a little bit shiny right now, but trust me, once this stuff dries, it comes out looking amazing and matte. Easily my favorite texture paste. Now we have our basic garden beds. I need to put some plants in them, but first things first, I think I'm going to take all of my pieces of wooden terrain before we add any greenery and give them a dry brush with a towel light ochre just to help them pop a little bit more, as I really like this color as a highlight over any wooden pieces that I build. So I grab out some old roughed up brushes and start adding in that very, very thin highlight coat of the towel light ochre. Some areas got this a little bit heavier than ideal, but realistically, wood has lots of random colors and patterns to it, and in the end I was happy with the end result. This highlight brought them back up to life and helped them to pop that little bit more on the table. You could always add another layer of your wash if you were unhappy with how bright they got, but this was the exact effect that I was going for. So I repeated it over my garden beds. Next up, I wanted to add some life to my pieces. So I went outside and found some sticks. Any sticks would do, but obviously you want to find something that's about the right scale, and this worked out perfectly for me. So I grabbed these bits and pieces, started cutting them to size, and then supergluing them to the edges of my archway, bringing back that accelerant spray I had earlier to just speed up the process so I wouldn't have to hold these forever. I added a heap of these sticks to the outer edges, a few to the roof like it's growing up and over, and even a few smaller bits on the inside corners until I was happy with the level of overgrowth. This is going to be a base for a heap of flocking, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. As for now, we're going to start planting out our garden beds with a whole heap of static grass tufts and flowers. This is admittedly the one part of this build that isn't super cheap, but you can get these for decent prices, and as long as you don't want as big of a range maybe as I'm using, you'll get away with it a lot cheaper. Alternatively, you could just fill this up with some thick flocking and it would look just fine. But since I have all these, I'm going to use them to build up a kind of layered garden, with some bigger pieces towards the back, moving forward to the front as things get smaller. I have an end result in mind that I'm trying to stick to, and you'll see that play out as I get a little bit further along. But for now, you'll see I'm just gluing everything down, trying to match the same pattern in both garden beds as I go. Most of these are fairly basic tufts and flowers, but I do have these nicer ones that I got from a model railway shop here on the Gold Coast in Australia that I really like but don't really use enough. But in this case, they seemed like a great addition to put that little bit of extra pop into the back layer of our garden bed. I for one really like this pattern, using some larger ones at the back down to the smaller pieces at the front, and they look really nice and symmetrical when put on either side of our archway. Additionally, they're a really nice scale next to a miniature. I do have a few more tiny details to add onto these later on, but for now, let's add a little bit of overgrowth to our archway. For this, I have 2 different flockings that I have blended together to make a mixed color and make them a little bit smaller. I want these to be stuck to all of our bits of sticks on the side, so I cover them in super glue and just start applying my flocking. I make sure to hit this pretty heavy on the sides and then have it flow over onto the top of our archway, and then eventually putting a few smaller bits on the inside of the archway like it's poking through. Once this is dried, I wipe away the excess and we are left with a really nice sporadic looking overgrown vines and bush for our archway. Now we have all of our greenery on our scatter. It's looking really nice, and it still fits in perfectly into our original maze pieces. But we have one more stage to go.
And that's adding in all of those tiny little 3D printed details and bits and pieces that really make my builds pop and give our players something extra to notice at the table. So let's grab them out and start gluing them in place.
All of these tiny little 3D printed bits are available for free on Thingiverse, and I'll have them linked in the description. I'll throw down some snails, a few mushrooms into one of these garden beds, a couple of butterflies, and of course we need our little frogs. And we'll mix in a couple of these little dragonflies. Then we repeat the process over our main archway, adding in a few of the critters. We'll put a snake hidden up in the top here, and of course we need a frog. And with those final few details, this piece of garden scatter is finished. It's much smaller than a lot of my more recent builds, but it fits perfectly in the openings to my modular maze system. In addition, I think that these pieces can come in really handy in a whole heap of different environments as great pieces of scatter. The garden beds and the frame can be used in any kind of farm environment or garden, maybe something in the Feywild, or really just sitting around in just about any town environment. I'm enjoying making these beautiful garden pieces and having a bit of fun with scatter, and I have a couple more planned in the future. But if you think of something cool that you'd like to see me approach, let me know in the comments, because as I've shown here, what you guys say is a big inspiration for what I'm going to build next. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and until next time, never stop making stuff.